So in this section, we are going to implement the control binding using the new input system, and I've created a custom actions to work with Playmaker. I will put the link in the description here, but basically you can download it from my GitHub here, and I've already have it in my drive right now, so I'm going just to import the custom actions. So here, basically I'm going to drag this whole player input folder into my custom actions project here. Okay, so now it's done compiling. The next thing that we want to do, we want to open the Playmaker editor here, and I have created a canvas UI here, and if I go to the game view here, you see that I have this layout actions, the name of the actions, and then the keyboard button for binding those actions. And basically this is just a simple UI using a horizontal layout group and then a bunch of vertical layout groups for everything else. And then each of this layout group has like a button and also a text for those captions here. So let's try to binding to one of the action. In this case, let's try to bind it to the up action. So here on the up button, I'm going to create a new FSM here. And basically what we want to do is we want to make it that whenever the player press the button, it will wait for an input, a new input from either the keyboard or the gamepad, and then rebind the up actions to that new button that we assign. So here in the player input, now we have load binding override actions, save binding override actions, and this is basically to save our settings, our new settings, our override path to a JSON string format, and then we can save those string either to the cloud or to your local storage in your game, in the platform. And then we have this apply binding action, and we have the get current binding action, and we have the perform interactive binding action. Apply binding action will apply a new path to the actions that we want to load. For example, if we want to assign a specific button from a new path that we have saved in the local storage, and then we want to apply that button to the game when the game first started, we can use the apply binding actions. Get current binding actions will get the current action binding, and it will save it to a string that we can use to show what is the current button is bind currently. And then the perform interactive binding actions is a actions to get a new path or a new button to a specific action binding, whether it's from a keyboard, gamepad, or mouse. So in this case, I'm going to use the UI button on click event first, and then I'm going to create a new event called on pressed, and here let's add that transition, and basically we want to send that on press event whenever we are clicking. And here we want to go to a new state, and then we want to perform the interactive binding, and then just browse through the player input here, and I'm going to use the perform interactive binding action. And basically it asks for a input actions reference, so we can just browse this, and I'm going to use the gameplay actions asset. And the first one that I want to use is the move, because we are going to bind this to the up action. And basically we can pick all of the binding here. This is up, down, and by default it is set to WSAD, and the left stick for a gamepad. So for this, I want to bind to a keyboard, and if you want to bind to a gamepad, you can just change this to gamepad. Here the binding, I'm going to set this to up, but you can assign this using a integer if you pick this manual binding, and this is going to be useful later when we are creating a template for custom actions. For now, I'm going just to pick the up action, and for the new rebinded key, I'm going to create a new variable, new key for example, and then for the new path, for the new rebinded path, I'm going to create a new variable called new path, and path is basically the address to that button. And you will see in a second here. And we can add an exclude path. I'm going to explain this in a bit. So for now, I'm going to add a new event called Rebind success, for example. And we need to also add another event, Rebind error. And here in the state, I'm going to add the Rebind success, and I'm going to send the Rebind success to a new state. And here in this new state, basically we want to update the button caption. So for the error, I'm going to add the error transition here, Rebind error. And when it's error, I want to send this back to the first state where we are waiting for the press or the button press. So I'm going to make this layout a bit better. And now here, basically we want to update the text on our button. So first, we can use the set property because I don't have the Text Mesh Pro custom actions imported. So I'm going to use the set property here. And I'm going to create a new variable object. And this is going to be the button text. And for the object, I'm going to change it to Text Mesh Pro. And I'm going to pick the TMP text. And this is basically the base class of the Text Mesh Pro UGUI and the 3D text. So we can assign both text to the slot. And here I'm going to pick that object that we have created, the button text here. And now we have the property to change the text here. If we scroll down, we should be able to see the text property. And then we can change its string value here. And for the string value, I'm going to assign this to the new key, not the new path. Okay, so now once this is success, I'm going to add a finish transition, and I'm going to send this to the first state. And here in the first state, basically before the first state, we want to get the current binding to update the text here. So I'm going to add a new state, and then I'm going to set this as a start state. Add a finish transition, then I want to go to the next state here, which is the previous first state. Okay, so here basically I'm going to use the current get current binding action, and the same I'm going to pick the gameplay move here, and I'm going to get the up keyboard or the up action, and we want to get the current rebinded key. I think we can just use the new key here, it's okay. And then basically when it's finished, instead of going to the first state, I'm going to go to the third state here. So we update the text, and then once finished, it goes to this first state here. So I think it's all good. We just need to rename this. I'm going to call this get current binding. Now to make things easier, let's just create a variable. For the input actions reference, it's going to be a type of object, and let's just call this input action reference. And for the object, we can just go to the Unity engine, and if you scroll down, we should find the input system here, and here we can get the input actions reference. So we want to get this here, and here we want to change this to use the input actions reference. And for the perform interactive binding, we also want to use the input actions reference. Okay, so now I'm going to assign the reference here. Let's pick the gameplay move here. We have the button text. For the button, we don't need anything because we are using the owner. And then we have the input actions reference. This we need to assign to the child text here. So I'm going to drag the child text of the button here to the slot here, and the new path and the new key should be empty. Okay, so I'm going to save the scene here. Let's disable the panel because we don't want this panel to close the view. I also need to change the event system to use the new input system UI input module here. So I'm going to click this replace button, and it will update this, save the scene, and now we can test this. So here, if I press the control remap button, it shows this panel here. And as you can see, the up button is assigned to W, and this is the get current binding actions, getting the string of the key, and then we setting to the text of the button here. Now if I press this button here, I can change this to T, for example, and now I cannot use the W anymore to move. I'm trying to press the W, the other still works, but to move forward, I need to press T. Now I can move with T, but not W. Okay, so let's make this more interesting with the button here. So I'm going to select the up button. And basically, whenever we perform an interactive binding actions, for example, let's just copy this action and let's put this below the perform interactive binding actions. And instead of using the new key, I'm going to set the value like press a key, for example. And then let's set the graphic color using the UI graphic set color here. And let's change this to like a green color, for example. And I'm going to copy this action here. Whenever we are updating the button text, I'm going to revert this back to white. Okay, so let's save this. The next thing that we want to do is we want to make this into a template so we can reuse this FSM on another button easily. The first thing that we need to do is we need to change this perform interactive binding actions, the binding here, to a integer value. So I'm going to use the manual binding here, and I'm going to create a new binding index here, a new variable, and let's just call this binding index. And for the match path, I'm going to create a new variable enum. So let's just use variable and then create a new variable, and let's just call this match path. And we have the enum created automatically here. So we want to expose a couple of the variable here, the binding index. We want to expose this, and we need to check the input, the button text. We also want to expose this, the input actions reference. We want to expose this, and then the match path. And while we are here, I'm going to also set this exclude path to a string. So I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call this exclude path. And here for the exclude path, I'm going to also expose this as a variable. So now we have exposed everything here. I'm going to save this as a template, and I'm going to save it in the template folder or the custom actions here. And then I'm going to call this interactive binding template, for example. We can use the save template in this FSM here. And now you will ask me, what is this binding index value? So here, if we go to the project and then we go to the third person controller input system folder here in the control map, if we open this, each of the binding will have like an integer as the ID. So for example, for move here, this is going to be in the order from the top to the bottom. So keyboard is going to be 0, up is going to be 1, this is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then on each actions it resets. Jump, this is 0 and 1. For the attack, this is 0 and 1. And for the pickup, this is 0 and 1. So we need to remember those binding index value. I'm going just to close this. Here in the each of the button here, now I can just go to this inspector and then I can just set the binding index. I know that up is 1, so I'm going to set the binding index to 1. And for the button text, it is already set to the child. For the exclude path, we are going to leave this empty for now, and the actions reference is already set to gameplay move. Since this is going to be only for keyboard, I'm going to use the match path keyboard. And then the next thing that we want to do is we want to add a use template here in the down button. So we can just type, we can just go to the use template menu here, and then I'm going to choose the interactive binding template here. Now on the side here, I can just drag the child because I'm not sure if this is referencing the child or the previous button. And then for the binding index, down is 2, and this is move, correct, and this is keyboard. So I'm going just to need to do all of this for the rest of the button. I'm going to fast forward the video here. And for jump, we can use the template here, but we need to make sure that we are changing the actions reference, and this should be the jump. And then the same as the child object, and for the index for the keyboard is going to be 0 because 1 is going to be for the gamepad. So let's do it for the other actions, which is attack and pick up. Okay, so now we are done here. Let's save the scene and let's give this a try. So let's open this, and as you can see here, we already have everything, but I think this is wrong for some reasons. Let's take a look here. What went wrong actually? So here for the down button, let's check the current binding. Oh, okay, it's for some reason it doesn't use the manual binding, so we need to fix the template here. So let's just click the edit template here, and basically for the get current binding actions, we need to use the manual binding here, and then use the binding index variable that we've set up here on the side. And basically this should be all good on the other state. Yeah, let's just give this another try. Okay, as you can see here, we have the correct current binding information, WSAD space left control left shift, and now we can try to bind. For example, we can try to bind the attack to Z, for example, and then for pick up to X, and then for jump to C. And I'm going to change the up to T, down to G, left to F, or right to H, for example. Now I'm moving with those keyboard, and then for attack I'm using the Z button. For jumping I'm using, jumping I'm using the C button, and then for picking up I'm using the X button here. And this works with the gamepad as well. So let's just create the binding for the gamepad. Basically what we want to do is I want to re-enable this panel here so we can see it here. And I'm going to copy all of this game object, the keyboard, and then it will automatically create a new entry because I'm using those horizontal layout group. And I'm going to put this above the close button, and let's rename this to gamepad. And now for this actions, we want to change the match path to the gamepad for every of the button. And then we need to change the binding index. The move actions reference for the gamepad starts from 5, but 5 is actually the composite binding, so we need to get the next number, which is the up, down, left, right. So it starts from 6, and then the down is going to be 7, the left is going to be 8, and then the right is going to be 9. And for the jump action, the binding index is 1, and attack is also 1, pickup is also 1. Okay, so this should reference the correct, yeah, as you can see, if I click this, it references the correct text object. And then I'm going to show you an issue here. Let's just save the scene here, and let's just disable the remap panel again. And I'm going to use the gamepad now. Okay, so I can move around with the left stick, and then I can move the camera around with the right stick. But there is a problem here. For example, let's try to remap the right of the gamepad here to the right stick, for example. So I'm going to press the key here, and then I'm going to use the right stick to the right. Now we can use the right stick to the right here, and I can move around, but I cannot move to the right. If I want to move to the right, I need to use the right stick. I can move to the right, but it rotates the camera at the same time because the binding is conflicting right now. So in order to prevent that, this is where the exclude path comes in handy. Basically, this will exclude any previous path to a key on the keyboard or the gamepad, so it won't rebind this button or these actions to that path. For example, to the right stick. And how do we get this path? It's quite easy. We can go to the control map here, and then we can just go to the gamepad, for example, here, And here we have the path, but this is not the correct one. In order to see this, we need to press this T button here, and this will show the correct path. And basically this is the format of the path. We need like have this angled bracket, the name of the path or the device, whether it's gamepad or keyboard, and then the name of the composite, for example, or the analog control. This is left stick, and for the right stick is going to be the right stick with lowercase r. And just to confirm this, we can create a new up-down composite, for example. And then here for the up, let's say we want to bind this to the right stick. Where is it? Here, right stick up, for example. Then if we press T, you see that this is the path. But we don't need this up here. We can just get the right stick and the gamepad. So I'm going just to copy this string here, and then I'm going to remove this or delete this action or the composite here. I'm going to close this input action. And now if we go to the up, down, left, right button here, we can paste the exclude path here. Oops, I think it copies the JSONs of the input action, so I'm going to paste it here and then search for the gamepad right stick that we've added here. Okay, so this is the path here. Gamepad right stick. Let's just close this notepad, and then now we can paste this here. Okay, so now we have this. We just need to paste this to the other button, so it won't read those input, and we cannot rebind the movement to the right stick as well for the jump and the attack and the pickup. And this will prevent accidental binding to the same composite or analogs that is being used for the camera rotations, for example. So now let's test this one more time, and let's open the control remap here. Okay, so we need to change this header, but yeah, it's a minor issue. And now if I press the up button, and while it's waiting for a key, I cannot assign this to the right stick here. As you can see, I'm rotating the camera using the right stick, but the keyboard doesn't get registered. And I can use the D-pad, for example, for up, but it won't accept the right stick. So down, I can use the D-pad down, left and right, for example. And then now I cannot use the right stick anymore. I need to move it with the directional pad, and I can still use the right stick for rotating mouse. Okay, so now we have created the remap. Now the only thing that we need to create is the ability to save the rebinding settings. So here I'm going to re-enable the panel here, and let's add a save button here. So here I'm going to add a new UI button, but since we are using the horizontal layout group here, so we need to add a layout element component here, and we want to ignore the layout. So this button will not be regarded as one of the child objects that are going to be affected with this automatic layout group. And now we can just hold Alt and then press this button one here, and it will center the button there. I'm going to change the height to 50 or maybe 65, and then the width to 200. And for the position, we can move this to slightly up, maybe around 60 will be okay. And we can change the text to save. Okay, here. So here in the panel game object, we want to create a new FSM. So on the start state, we want to try to load the settings. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a couple of variables. So let's create a new variable, a string variable, and this is going to be the save key. And we are going to use a player preference to save the settings. And let's create a new variable for the JSON data. So I'm going to type this JSON data. And for the save key, we can expose this, so we can change this easily here. And here in the state, I'm going to use the load binding override actions. And this will try to load our saved data into our input action. So we need to pick our input actions, I'm going to pick the control map because this is basically the input actions that we are using for this rebinding and for moving the character. And the binding data in JSON, we want to use the JSON data. And here basically we want to also use the player prefs get string. And for the string here, we want to use the save key for the save key, and for the variable we want to load this to JSON data. And then we can add a finish transition. And here in the finish transition, I'm going to add a new state. For the new state, I'm going to wait for a button click event. For the game object, we can specify the game object and then drag the save button here. And basically we want to add a save event here, and then we want to send that event, and we need to add those transition save to the state here. And whenever we are clicking the save, then we want to use the save binding override action. So here I'm going to add a finish transition and then go back to the second state, and this will go back to the second state and we'll wait for another button click to do another save on the binding override. So here for the input action asset, let's just select the control map again, and for the binding data in JSON, we want to save this to the JSON data. And whenever we are saving here, we want to use the player prefs set string this time, and we want to save this JSON data string into the key of save key. So we want to save this to the save key here, and we want to save the JSON data. So next time, whenever this game starts, it will execute this state, and then it will try to get the save string if there are any, and then it will try to load the JSON data. And if it's empty, it won't load, and it won't change, it won't override the control map. Okay, so now we have set this up. There's another thing that we need to do here. In the button template here, we can edit the template here. And basically, we want to delay this by 1 frame. So I'm going to create a new state, and I'm going to add a next frame event. And for the next frame event, I'm going to send the finish event. I'm going to add that finish event, and I'm going to connect this finish event to the get current binding state. And I'm going to set this to the first state, or the set as start state. So basically this will delay everything by 1 frame with all of this template here. And this is to make sure that the save or the override actions are getting load first via the prior prefs and this load binding override actions. And this will happen in 1 frame. And then the next frame, the button will try to get the current binding. And this could be the default binding if there are no save. And if there are save data, then this will get the current binding from the save data. Okay, so now let's give this a try. So here I'm going to change the keyboard using the arrow, up arrow down, left, right. And I'm going to change the jump as well to Z, attack to X, and then pick up to C, for example. And let's save this. Okay, so now we have saved those. We can check the data here in the panel game object. Here, as you can see, we have this JSON format in the debug here, and this gets saved to the save key. There is one thing here. We haven't set the key, but this should work. It will search for the empty key, and that is also valid with the player prefs. But for best practice, you should define the save key. I just forgot to define this. Okay, so let's just stop the game here now. I'm going to hide the panel for now, and let's run this again. So we need to open the control remap, and as you can see, as I open it, it shows like the up, down, left, right arrow and the Z, X, C keyboard for the jump, attack, and pick up. So this load the save data that I've previously saved in the previous session. and I can move using those key now, and I can attack using those Z, or jump using Z, X attack, and then C for pick up. So yeah, that is basically how we can save the control remap. So yeah, that is basically how you rebind, create a rebind control for your game using the new input systems and Playmaker.